The movie opens in Florida in the year 1981. Violet Hanson, a little child, is out camping with her family. She ventures into the woods one afternoon and discovers a woman sitting by herself by the lake. She introduces herself as Rose the Hat and uses magic to enchant Violet. The girl then discovers others seeing them from a nearby hiding place. Prior to Rose and everyone else in the woods converging on Violet, Rose informs Violet that she possesses a little amount of magic. Danny Torrance, who had his horror at the Overlook Hotel, is currently recovering in another location. His life has changed forever, and now he is drinking his days and nights to suppress his shine. He hasn't talked to his mother Wendy since their stay there, and she's worried since he continues to have dreams about the ghosts of the hotel, including the Grady twins and the bathtub lady from room 237. Danny has shine abilities that allow him to see ghosts like Dick Halloran. By demonstrating a box that he can use to capture bad spirits, he demonstrates to Danny a method for keeping them at bay. Wendy then rushes outside to see Danny sitting alone on the bench. Danny and Wendy are watching TV together that evening. The bathtub lady is waiting for Danny in the bathroom. When he excuses himself, he successfully traps her inside a box he creates in his head. He goes back to his mother and resumes their conversation. Jump to 2011, where Dan is an alcoholic and resides in New Jersey. He engages in a bloody bar brawl in which he knocks down a man, and he subsequently hooks up with a patron from the same establishment. He is annoyed by finding the woman's child when he awakens in the morning. Andy, a teenager from Long Island, meets an older man who stumbled upon her on a website. Rose and her right-hand man, Crow Daddy, are keeping a safe space between them. Andy has the ability to influence others into doing what she says, before leaving a snake-bite-like wound on his face. Rose, who is impressed, approaches Andy outside the theater and takes her with her and Crow. They take her to their lair, where Rose informs Andy that she possesses particular abilities that benefit their sect, the True Knot. The True Knot are a clan of individuals that wander the roads of America in quest of food. They appear to be harmless, generally elderly, dressed in polyester, and married to their RVs. Rose refers to her as Snakebite Andy and assures her that they will eat well, keep youthful, and live long. Meanwhile, in the other part of the country, Anniston, New Hampshire, Abra Stone is turning 5 years old. Her parents, Dave and Lucy, observe in the kitchen that Abra has made a slew of spoons float to the ceiling. She merely says, "Abracadabra," and orders them to sit. Dan comes to Frazier, New Hampshire, to begin a new life. In a tiny town to which he relocates, Billy Freeman becomes his sponsor for Alcoholics Anonymous membership, to whom Dan confesses that he is fleeing something. Dan finds a place to stay, thanks to Billy's recommendation to the landlord. Dan accepts a position at a hospice, where he utilizes his talents to console terminally ill patients, earning him the moniker Dr. Sleep. He starts getting telepathic communications from Abra Stone, a young girl whose shining is much stronger than his. Rose takes Andy to the beach for a ceremony that night. Grandpa Flick, the eldest True Knot member, conducts the ritual. Rose pulls out a canister carrying Violet's radiance, which is displayed as a forceful steam. While the other True Knot members receive their fair portion, Rose feeds Violet's shine to Andy. Andy yells and rides till the shine has been absorbed. In a nightmare, Dan sees a ghost curled up next to him. He asks Billy for assistance, and Billy invites Dan along to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Dan is introduced to Dr. John Dalton following the meeting. Dan approaches Dalton, after noticing him gripping his wrist, and explains that he dropped his watch in a lavatory, something only Dalton would know. Dalton offers Dan a position at the hospice, because of his previous experience as an orderly and because he is impressed by Dan's insight. He is also persuaded by Billy's recommendation. Dan is sweeping the floors during one night shift when he sees Azzy, the hospice's cat, entering the room of an elderly man. The man is aware that every time Azzy enters someone's room and sits on their bed, it is because she is aware they will pass away. The guy at first seems scared, but Dan telepathically reassures him that passing away is just like sleeping. The man refers to Dan as Dr. Sleep after feeling better. The elder man's breath leaving his body signals his quick departure. Dan sees "hello" scribbled on his wall, with a smiling face in the O when he gets home. He replies with just "hello." Dan has stayed clean 8 years later in the year 2019. He talks about how he never knew his father and only felt connected to him when he drank at a meeting. He came to understand that while his father had to go through the same struggle, Dan had taken the decision to prevail. He keeps working as an orderly, taking care of people who are close to passing away. He stays in touch with Abra as well. The True Knot hasn't eaten a quality meal in a long time, depending only on the leftovers from children with weaker shine. They follow Bradley Trevor, a teenage baseball player who benefits from his shine when playing. He is followed home by the True Knot, and Andy forces him into their van. They take him to a remote location, where they mercilessly pinning him down and feeding off his screams of agony. As soon as Abra discovers the crime, she starts yelling in her house and telling her parents that the boy has been slain. Abra is referred to as a looker by Rose, who can feel her presence there as well. Dan now notices the word "REDRUM" scrawled on his wall. When Abra is asked who, she responds, "Baseball boy." Bradley is then interred in a little burial by the True Knot. Abra investigates Bradley's disappearance in some detail. She can overhear her peers' thoughts at school. She sees the True Knot and their places as she enters her chamber at home. She glances out the window and temporarily floats as she is connected to Rose, who is at the grocery store. Rose is able to see Abra and make eye contact with her, but Abra pushes Rose away from her, giving Rose enough of a shove to send her flying across the floor. She is both thrilled and alarmed by this ability. Rose relays this knowledge to Crow and warns that they must eliminate her since her radiance may be too strong for the True Knot. Eventually, Dan and Abra meet and discuss their talents, which Dan refers to as the Shining, or Tony, since he believed it was like having an imaginary friend. Dan was considered an imaginary buddy by Abra. He cautions her from utilizing her radiance in any way that would draw their notice when she informs him about the True Knot. Dan meets Dick again, for the first time since his early years, when, after work, he follows Azzy into a bedroom. He asks Dan to safeguard Abra, since they have a connection, and cautions Dan about what the True Knot actually accomplishes. Dan is informed by Dick that this is the final time he will see him. Abra is sleeping when Rose enters her thoughts during meditation. When Rose attempts to search through what appear to be filing cabinets, Abra locks her hand in one of the drawers, since she knew Rose would return, causing the flesh on her hand to rip when Rose pulls it out. As soon as she regains consciousness, she notices that her injuries have followed her. She informs the others that Abra laid a trap for her, making it obvious that she must be executed. Then, Crow lets Rose know that Grandpa Flick is cycling. He convulses till he decomposes, and the Colt swallows his steam since he is too weak to continue. Abra contacts Dan once more and requests his assistance in locating Bradley's body, since she can discover the Colt if she touches his baseball glove. Dan is led by Abra to the location of the boy's grave, with Billy's assistance. The finding horrifies and physically repulses Dan and Billy, who dig up the body. They return with the glove to Abra's home, but Dave believes Uncle Dan to be some kind of predator after learning about Abra's interactions with him. Abra is able to monitor the cult and determine their whereabouts after explaining everything to Dave and showing him their ability. Dan and Billy use Abra emerging from her kitchen as bait to lure the cult into the woods. Rose feels the misery as the cult members are eliminated one by one as Dan and Billy conceal and start firing it. Andy uses her final breath to trick Billy into fatally shooting. After he shoots her, Crow murders Dave and kidnaps Abra in the meanwhile. When Dan gets back home, he is able to connect his mind to Abra's and momentarily take control of her. Together, they drive Crow to steer into a tree. Because he wasn't buckled up, he is instantaneously eradicated as he is catapulted through the windshield. Dan pulls up and finds Abra. Then they go in their car to take their last position at the now decrepit and abandoned Overlook Hotel. Dan moves through the structure where his enduring trauma first surfaced. He discovers room 237, which still bears Jack's axe marks. Dan goes to the mezzanine, where he encounters Lloyd, the bartender who looks eerily like Jack, but maintains he is just Lloyd. Dan describes how Wendy passed away when he was 20, and how he could tell she was about to pass because of the flies he always saw about people who were about to pass away. Before drinking the drink he offered Dan, Lloyd then lets down his veneer and channels Jack. Soon after Rose shows there, Dan and Abra work together to lure her into the chili hedge labyrinth. Abra manages to sever Rose's legs, but Rose is able to overcome them and escape. Dan confronts Rose, while Abra flees. She enters his head and witnesses the terror and fear he went through in that hotel, allowing her to begin absorbing his brilliance. Rose then notices the Overlook Spirits boxes and believes they hold greater power, but Dan instead lets them loose to use them against Rose. Rose is surrounded by the Grady twins, the Bathtub Lady, and other ghosts that absorb her shine and permanently ruin her. But they eventually focus on Dan and take control of him. He locates Abra, but she uses her connection to contact Dan and claim that he stopped at the boiler room. Knowing what would happen, Dan sends Abra outside, while he brings the spirits to the boiler room and waits outside as the Overlook eventually catches fire. Later, Abra carries on her communication with Dan's ghost. When her mother questions her about it, she initially denies anything, but then reveals she was chatting to both Dan and her father. Lucy seemed to be at ease with Abra's ability. Abra excuses herself from watching TV with them to go to the restroom. The Bathtub Lady is waiting for her, but Abra is already one step ahead of her